on global innovative practices and local approaches to advancing climate resilience in cities. To quickly introduce myself, I am an urban planning and resilience expert at UN Habitat's Urban Lab, working within the Global Future Cities program as a focal point for the program's climate resilience portfolio. And I'm also the country focal point for Malaysia and Indonesia. Now, if I can get my colleague Sarah to start sharing the presentation on screen. Thank you, Sarah. So today's event, if you can go back to the first slide. Today's event aligns with the World Cities Day theme of adapting cities to climate resilience. And as mentioned before, concludes the Global Future Cities Program Urban October Knowledge Sharing Series for 2021. As you all know and have experienced, climate events are increasing in occurrence and severity in all parts of the world. And the IPCC report announced that this past decade, from 2010 to 2020, was the hottest in 125,000 years. The changes are irreversible, with sea level projected to rise continuously, worsening the flooding and permanently impacting our coastal cities. The objective of today's session is to share global and localized tools and strategies that cities and communities can utilize to combat the consequences of global warming. Next slide, please. Before getting started, we have a few housekeeping items. First, please note that this event is being recorded. If you have any questions during today's presentations, please utilize the Q&A box, and we will compile them for the Q&A session towards the end of the event. You can also use the public chat function to engage throughout. Next. So going over the agenda, we will start off with opening remarks by Kate from the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives and Klaus Gross from UN Habitat. Then we will hear from our program partners on their adaptation efforts, followed by a moderated panel and Q&A. At the end of the session, we would appreciate any feedback through a short poll survey that we will have. So next, I will now turn it over to Kate, who, in addition to her senior officer role at ICLEI, is the Cities and Regions Race to Resilience lead for the UNFCCC's high-level champions team and has been working closely with the UK cabinet. She will highlight the importance of the city's involvement in the climate debate and how they have been catalyzing action that are also linked to the SDGs. So Kate, if you want to take the floor.
Thank you so much, and distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, partner organizations, colleagues and friends. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to join today, and I'd like to begin by thanking UN Habitat and your team in particular for organizing this important session. It's a privilege to be involved in this session. Today I'm speaking on behalf of the UNFCCC High-Level Climate Champions Race to Resilience team. As mentioned, I'm a senior professional officer from ICLEI Africa, and I'm seconded to the UNFCCC High-Level Champions team for part of my week, working closely with the UK presidency and the cabinet to ensure that cities' voices are heard in this year's COP, that they're not just heard in standalone cities events, but they're integrated into other events such as nature, transport, finance, just to mention a few examples. I'm pleased to be able to speak to you today, knowing very well that climate resilience and adaptation is a major priority for cities who face unprecedented climate change impacts on a daily basis, which are overlaid by significant socioeconomic challenges. The projected costs for Africa's adaptation response, for example, is around 45 to 50 billion USD a year, and this is predicted for 2050. And 350 billion a year USD by 2070. And this is extremely significant. The global south as a whole is vulnerable due to its high exposure and low adaptive capacity. The recent UN State of Climate in Africa 2019 report, for example, shows that there's increasing climate change threats for human health, food and water security, as well as socioeconomic development in Africa and Asia, due to climate hazards such as increasing temperatures, sea levels, changing precipitation patterns, and more extreme weather events. So basically, when it comes to climate change, the global south is in the eye of the storm. 650 million people in urban areas will face water scarcity in the coming years. The impacts will hit the most vulnerable the hardest and contribute towards food insecurity, population displacement, and increasingly stress on water resources, which affect economic sectors such as health, energy, and waste. But more specifically, cities have been faced with a significant challenge related to two crises over the past year: the COVID-19 pandemic and the increasingly frequent and intense impacts of climate change. This is especially true of its fast-growing cities, where change in climate patterns is threatening rapidly expanding populations and investment opportunities. High birth rates and increasing rural-urban migration means that something like 86 out of 100 of the world's fastest growing cities will be impacted, and at least 79 of those cities, including key political and commercial hubs, are faced with extreme risks due to climate change. With rising sea levels, increasing temperatures, and changes in rainfall patterns leading to floods or severe droughts, these cities will face a strain on their essential services, including healthcare and disaster mitigation systems. And I think we've seen a lot of this in the past year also with COVID-19. To date, the responses to disasters has largely been reactive. Given the significant impact that natural hazards and climate change will have on urban investments, increasing priority is now placed on proactive, adaptive planning to reduce and manage the potential for disasters and climate change. It is therefore important that we ensure climate considerations are embedded in all city planning policies, not just in standalone climate plans. It is crucial to ensuring resilient and sustainable development. Climate change is a multi-sectorial issue. It will affect all of us in multiple ways, and thus integrated systematic approaches are needed to tackle it. Harnessing skills and opportunities within all municipal departments is therefore vital. And perhaps even more vital is proactively securing finance for climate change and sustainability actions to ensure they don't remain in policies but lead to real on-the-ground changes. ICLEI globally has always prioritized low carbon, resilient, and people-centered development, and therefore we have thrown our full weight behind both the Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience initiatives. And you can change to the next slide here. And we have seconded 2 ICLEI staff members to work directly with the high-level champions and with cities and regions from across the world on the Race to Resilience initiative. We are very proud of the city's Race to Resilience, the primary initiative for cities to join the global Race to Resilience campaign. And our call to action is to the leaders and all stakeholders across the globe to join the Race to Resilience today and pledge your actions in line with commitments that support the global fight against climate change. In a nutshell, the Race to Resilience is a global campaign run by the COP26 presidency and high-level champions to rally leadership and support from cities, regions, businesses, investors to help frontline communities build resilience and adapt to the impacts of climate change. The Race to Resilience aims to catalyze action by non-state actors to build the resilience of 4 billion people from vulnerable groups and communities to climate risks. Next slide. It is really easy to join the Race to Resilience, and there's so many benefits for cities to join the Race to Resilience. They have access to additional resources that can further support them on their journey, the resilience journey, as well as more profiling events as to what they're doing on the ground, as well as further support with their reporting each year. And they're also a part of an amazing initiative that is driving resilience globally. We know through action on the ground, cities can show that they are engines of change and beacons of hope, and we do not have to wait forever to make change. We can act rapidly and act now, and this is what the Race to Resilience for Cities encourages cities to do, is by taking action immediately, even if it is small actions like planting trees. These all contribute to building resilience on the ground. Therefore, a few pavilions to watch out for at COP26 this year include the Resilience Hub and the LGMA Multi-Level Action Pavilion, where there are events specifically focused on cities and building resilience at a local level. As the saying goes, a planned city is a well-prepared city. And this has become even more important as we see all over the world how cities have adapted to the global pandemic by embedding resilience within their policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. We will now have Klaus Groth, Senior Urban Planner with UN Habitat and Global Future Cities Program Manager, provide background of the program and its contribution to climate resilience.
Thank you so much, Jean, and also thank you, Kate, for the overview of the race to resilience leading up to the COP, but also for emphasizing and outlining the current challenges and the importance to embed urban resilience and climate action in all planning activities. As Jean said, my name is Klaus Groth, Senior Urban Planner based at UN Habitat's Urban Planning and Design Lab in Nairobi, Kenya. And by that, I'm managing the UN Habitat support in the delivery of the UK-funded Global Future Cities program. UN Habitat functions as a strategic and capacity building partner. And in this capacity, we have hosted a series of knowledge sharing sessions. And together with the UK Built Environment Advisory Group, UN Habitat's implementing partner, a series of thematic webinars, city-to-city exchange sessions, in-country events are being delivered. And all with the purpose to raise awareness, build capacity, and provide opportunities for exchange and learning among partners, for example, on urban resilience. It is therefore my pleasure to invite you all, city representatives, delivery partners, and representatives from the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office to this fourth and concluding knowledge sharing session under the Future Cities program. Urban October is about to conclude, and it has been a month of discussion around sustainable urbanization globally. And this year, the theme is focused on climate action in our cities, of course, sparked by the upcoming climate conference, COP26 in Glasgow. On Sunday, the World Cities Day takes place under the theme, Adapting Cities for Climate Change. And in today's session, we'll explore and discuss a few examples that contributes to that. Broadly speaking, the Global Future Cities program helps establish improved urban planning and management approaches towards sustainable urbanization. The program builds upon 30 projects that currently are being developed under the thematic pillars of urban planning, mobility, and resilience. And these 30 projects are spread across 19 cities in 10 countries. 4 of these projects have a direct relation and link to urban resilience and climate action. For example, the development of a drainage system in Ho Chi Minh City, a flood management system in Bangkok, an earthquake preparedness strategy in Surabaya, and the design of a public park in New Clark City. Next slide, please. To enhance the quality of the projects and to align them to the Sustainable Development Goals, UN Habitat has developed and now applies what we call the SDG Project Assessment Tool, which helps cities to incorporate adaptation strategies in their development intervention. The SDG tool was also discussed during the fairly recent Innovate for Cities conference. And for those who are interested, there is a recording available. We can share the link later. And in today's session, we'll also learn more about UN Habitat's City Resilience Action Planning Tool, which promotes a participatory approach in planning processes towards urban resilience. Next slides. Finally, I would just like to thank all the program partners who have contributed to Urban October 2021 by sharing their collective experience and expertise on climate change mitigation and urban resilience. All in all, the Global Future Cities program has so far featured in some 15 events during Urban October. So a big thank you to all of you. And with that, I would just like to wish you all an interesting and productive session. Thank you so much, and back to you, Jean.
Thank you, Klaus, for setting the stage for the next set of presentations. But before we move on to the presentations, we'd like to ask the audience to take part in a series of short questions to understand who we have with us today. So you should be seeing a poll pop up soon. If you can just take a few seconds to answer the first question, where are you joining us from? It looks like we have many joining us from Asia, also from Europe. And we'll share the results now for everyone to see. The next question is, what type of organization are you representing? What type of work do you do? It looks like we have quite a lot from the private sector, but I will give you a few more seconds to participate in the poll. And I will end the poll now. So it looks like we have very diverse representation. And finally, the last question. What climate challenge does your city or community face the most currently? I know, different cities and regions face many multiple kind of challenges, but maybe one that is most maybe severe. Give a few seconds for people to answer the question. I know it's hard, this question is hard. I will end the poll to share the results now. It looks like we have coastal flooding that's kind of leading. For those who have answered other, if you can maybe in the chat describe some of the challenges you're experiencing. But it's great. It's to see that we are covering all of the different challenges. I will stop sharing now and share the results. And thank you for participating. If you can go to the next slide for me, Sarah. Next, our first presenter, Selena, will discuss the importance of participatory approach to building climate resilience in secondary cities. So Selena is an architect with 12 years of experience with the private sector, NGOs, and the UN, and has a specialization in project strategies and innovation in humanitarian emergencies. She is currently an urban resilience program specialist at UN Habitat Regional Office for Africa. So Selena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean, and hello everyone. Can we move? Thank you. So today I will give you a brief overview of the CityRap methodology as a participatory approach to build climate resilience in secondary cities. Next, please. And I would like to start from the beginning, setting a little bit of background. As we know, urban areas are considered more vulnerable to disasters and extreme weather events than rural areas because of their high concentration of assets and people. Regarding the African context, we have also a high rate of urbanization that has taken place in the last year and is going to grow. As we see here today in Africa, we have 470 million people living in cities, and this figure is projected to grow up to 1.33 billion people living in cities by 2050, which is almost 3 times what we have today. This fast-paced growth has found often many cities not enough equipped to deal with, on the one hand, with the threat of climate change, and on the other, with the rapid urbanization dynamics. leading to the growth of the city out of the legal and planning frameworks, leading to the formation and the constitution of what we call slums, the informal settlements, which are characterized by high population density, that are often located in high-risk areas and lack of basic infrastructure and services, which, as we know, are fundamental in case of disasters. Next, please. Another point I would like to show about the dynamic of urbanization in Southern Africa is the dichotomy of city sizes. In sub-Saharan Africa only, we found that more than 60% of the urban population living in cities in less than 1 million inhabitants. The map you see here, we developed for a regional assessment on urban vulnerability in the SADC region. So what you see here is just the Southern African Community Development member states, but it's quite representative of the situation of Southern Africa. So what you can see here represented are dots corresponding to urban settlements. The big one, the blue one, are the big cities or mega cities if they have more than 10 million inhabitants. But as you can see, most of the urban settlements are the little dots and have less than 100,000 inhabitants, so very small cities compared to the others. What does it mean? That such disparity means differentiated needs and opportunity when it comes to urban resilience, of course. Big cities and small cities have a different dynamics. Next, please. So the City Resilience Action Planning City Wrap tool, it found its space in this point, meaning that we work with this tool, work with secondary city, with small cities, and is a tool, is a 4-phase participatory resilience planning process that aims to enable city administration officials and community members in small to intermediate sized cities in developing country to work together to make their city safe and resilient. What do we mean by small to intermediate sized cities? We actually aim often to maximum inhabitants and population of 250,000 people, which can be either small cities or neighborhoods and districts in bigger cities. This process leverages local knowledge through a participatory approach and aims at putting the municipality at the driver's seat of the process since day one. Theoretical structure for data collection at city level has been developed as a resilience framework with 5 interrelated pillars, which are urban governance, urban planning and environment, resilient infrastructure and basic services, urban economy and society, urban disaster risk management. Next, please. So to briefly describe how it works, we said that is a 4-phase process. We aim at involving 200-300 people each time from different urban stakeholders, as you can see here. And the process is expected to be concluded in 3-4 months. Before the kickoff of the process, there is a preparatory phase, which consists in the first contact with the municipality, when we get the engagement and the commitment from main officials, from the mayor, and when we select of municipal officials to be the leaders of the process, and they are what we call municipal focal points. The first phase of the process is basically a 5-day crash course where we invite all the identified urban stakeholders together, and where we set the basis, a common understanding of the main concept of urban resilience and disaster risk reduction. From there, we have phase 2, which is where we have the bulk of data collection at several levels. This data is then analyzed and organized and prioritized in phase 3, and all the result of these 3 phases fit into phase 4 and into the development of what we call the City Resilience Framework for Action, or CDRFA, which is the final product of the process. Next, please. Briefly, why is useful City Wrap? Why we should apply it and where we have applied it so far? CityRap is useful for skills and tools transfers to municipal officials, to community members, and so on. It's useful for gathering urban data collection, to use of local information and knowledge to identify the key gaps and entry points for building the urban resilience, to foster resource mobilization, and then to establish a shared vision of the city. Since 2016, the first time we applied it, we implemented it. Now we have reached more than 30 cities in Africa. And this year, for the first time in January, we implemented a lighter version of the process in Amman, Jordan, which was the first time outside Africa. Next, please. So now, instead of going into too much details about each one of the 4 phases, I would like to bring your attention to some standout features of this process. The first being the local data collection. We know that a lack of data is often a problem in an urban context. And with this methodology, data is collected with a unique approach, and we use exercises that have been developed specifically for this tool. The data collection happens at several levels. We have the municipal level, where, for example, a municipal self-assessment questionnaire of 75 questions is submitted to each one of the municipal department of the city where we are implementing the tool. Then we have data collection at the community level with participatory planning activities and community consultations. And then we have moments where all the stakeholders come together in joint workshop, and through several activities, we continue to gather data and create consensus around what is being decided and the way forward. Next, please. Another important point that as we said, is the participatory approach. This tool is built on participatory methods and consensus building techniques to involve all the stakeholders to identify the key entry points to start building the city resilience in a progressive manner, with the aim of having the minimal external support. We said at the beginning that the aim is to put the municipality at the driver's seat and to lead the process. And speaking of the participatory approach, it is worth to mention who are the key actors from this process. So we can mention the team of experts, which are usually a team of 2-3 people from UN Habitat, kicking off the process and supporting both on-site during specific activities and for the whole duration of the process as a remote support. Then we have the municipal focal points, which are 3-6 municipal staff members to be appointed in the preparatory phase. In some cases, we also had up to 10 people, 10 municipal focal point supporting the process. And they lead, as we say, the process from phase 2 to phase 4. Then we have all the other urban stakeholders, because as we said, in each phase, representatives from different urban sectors are invited to take part of the process. Next, please. Another important point is the prioritization. We are talking here about building resilience, and is an all-encompassing concept which looks at reducing environmental and socioeconomic risks, enhancing adaptation, promote sustainable development, and is not realistic to address all these aspects at the same time. Also because during the process, especially at the beginning, a lot of issues regarding the city comes up, and is not realistic to address every one of them at the same time. So there is a need to prioritize and identify these key entry points so that the concerned local authorities are fully in control of the process and the process is doable. To do that, we have a series of activities, and one of them is a filtering of these identified priority issues through 3 prioritization lenses, which are climate change adaptation and mitigation, sustainable urban growth, and inclusive and safer cities. Next, please. This slide is just to show you in a graphic and visual way how the process works. I am aware that it's not readable. This is not my goal. I just want to focus on what is the starting point, which are the identified problems that you see in the left part of the scheme. And through the whole 4 phases, we we come up with priority actions, which are maximum 6 to be selected. They often are interlinked, and they represent the core of the final product of the process, which is the resilience framework for action. And this scheme is actually coming from an actual implementation of the CityWrap. And just to mention some of them, to give you an idea of what are the outcomes and what are the identified priority action. Here we have action on roads and drainage, early warning systems, protection of natural resources, financial management, and urban plans. Next, please. So what is the main outcome of this process? We said that is the resilience framework for action, which is this document, which is aligned with existing national and local level priorities. And this is why it's a framework for action and not an action plan. It is the end of the CityWrap process, but it also is the starting point for the future action identified during the process. Each priority action is then translated in concept note for bankable projects. This is a very important point for the future for the evolution of the process, and these concept notes are usually included in this the City RFA. Also is established a monitoring and evaluation framework. This RFA is validated by relevant authorities, potential donors, key partners, and is formally endorsed by the municipal authorities. As examples of outcomes coming from real and actual implementation of this tool, we can mention that this process and the RFA and the final product can be an incentive for cooperation between communities and local government. Can trigger community self-mobilization to take action on identified action and problems. Could be a contribution to longer-term processes, like, for example, influencing policies and legislations, both at the local and the national level, and then can be a very powerful tool to mobilize additional funding. Next, please. As my last slide, I would like to show you what is going on right now regarding CityWrap activities. Right now we are implementing it in Rwanda in Zimbabwe and in Anjouan in Comoros. In November this year, we are planning to provide a training, a CityWrap training for the Beau-Bassin-Rosil municipality in Mauritius. And in December, we are planning to deliver a virtual training for the city in the Asia Pacific region. And this will be actually the first time implementing a CityWrap activity in that region. And also, I would like to leave you with some open questions that we have actually, because CityWrap is a living tool. We try to improve it and to learn from each implementation we made. So there is actually open questions open points to define, and I would like to convey to you also for maybe brainstorming and trigger discussion. And I just put in 3 of them. Like, for example, one question that we have is like, how can we systematize and use the data that we collect through the CityWrap process? And once the process is concluded, both on the side of the municipality that we are implementing CityWrap in, and also in terms of exchange of information and knowledge with maybe other cities facing the same threats and the same challenges in the region. Also, another question is how can the municipal focal points can be better supported for drafting the concept notes for the CDRFA, because as we said, this is a very important point for the future of the process, and often the local authorities and municipal officials are not trained in that area. And finally, another point is how to ensure continuity, monitoring, and evaluation, including measuring the impact of what we are doing once the process is concluded. Next, please. I would like to thank you. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have questions, you can both contact me at my email or going to the DIMS website that you can see in the right side part of the screen. And you can also scan the QR code to go directly to the link. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Selena, for introducing us to the city rep tool and sharing actionable pathways for cities to identify issues and prioritize urban resilience planning. Next, we have Rory, who will give an overview of the policy and programs of the UK FCDO's Resilient Cities Initiative. Rory is an urban advisor in the Resilient Cities and Infrastructure team. He has 12 years of experience of policy and project delivery roles in the UK government, working with city governments in Europe and international agencies in Africa across a range of sectors. So Rory, take it away.
Thanks, Jean. Good morning and good afternoon to those of you who are joining. My name is Rory Moody. I'm an urban advisor, as Jean said, in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, which is a department of the UK government. It was recently formed from a merger from the Department for International Development and the Foreign Commonwealth Office. So it brings together essentially the diplomatic core of the UK government on one side and development professionals on the other. I'm going to. Okay, thanks, Jean. Can I see? Hope that's better. That's the camera. So I'm just going to give an overview of the policy and programs context from the FCDO perspective and speak a bit about why cities are important to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, why the urban agenda matters, and why it's relevant to climate change. Next slide, please. So just as a recap, thanks. I hope that's better.
Rory, I think, sorry to interrupt, I think your camera is facing the other way.
Yeah, sorry about that. Is that better?
We now have a beautiful view of the outside of the window and the trees.
Okay, sorry. Hang on one sec. Is that better?
Yes, perfect. Maybe up a little bit. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Folks. Good. Thank you, Jean. So just as a recap, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what the goals are for the UK presidency for COP. Kate mentioned earlier, she gave a plug to the race to resilience, and I've just mentioned the race to zero. So that's really about getting cities and businesses and NGOs and civil society on board with going further and faster. And one way we're doing that is through a program with through another department of the UK government, Business, Industry and Industrial Strategy. They've worked with the C40 climate change group, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, to try and drive climate action plans, to try and support city governments to generate and deliver climate action plans, and also to raise finance. So that's just one program. And then the other four are obviously all relevant to cities. Not least, I would highlight the second one around adapting to protect communities and natural habitats. So there's been quite a lot on the agenda of COP around nature-based solutions and their application not only to cities but also to rural areas. But I'd like to highlight that we've done work, for example, in Lusaka around one particular project working with GIZ around creating effectively natural drainage systems in Lusaka and also restoring the water table to provide water security in Lusaka. And then on mobilizing finance, that's also very relevant to cities. We know that many city governments in Asia and Africa struggle to generate revenue and then to deploy that finance to infrastructure projects that can respond to future climate change impacts. So that's something else I'll talk a bit about later. And then obviously collaboration. And we have, the UK government has supported the Global Future Cities Programme, obviously working with UN Habitat and the UK Built Environment Advisory Group. We've also worked with partners like the Cities Alliance and the Coalition for Urban Transitions to make the case for the urban agenda and to highlight why cities are important. And just sort of two quick facts to remind you all. and I'm sure many of you know this, but cities account for around 60 to 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And I think the infrastructure sector accounts for around 60%. So just in terms of the relative weight of cities and particularly infrastructure as well in cities, both primary and secondary cities, the sort of battle or the struggle to address climate change, in my view, will be sort of the crucible of it will be in cities, if you like. Next slide, please. So just to highlight, so in terms of policy, one of the areas that FCDO has identified as critical to the urban climate change agenda is our secondary cities. And Selene mentioned the sort of differentiated needs of cities. And so I just drew out this visual, the schematic, to highlight the sort of the urban abatement potential in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Is a lot of it is in cities with fewer than 1 million residents, and obviously a lot of those cities will grow in size, both in terms of urban land cover and in terms of population growth. But in terms of addressing climate change directly, a lot of that opportunity for donors and UK government and other partners we work with will be in secondary and intermediary cities. And for example, in Hawassa, we were working with the subnational government there on planning, and we're actually working with UN Habitat to think about waste management there. When I went to Ethiopia a couple of years ago on a scoping mission to try and look about how do we plan Hawassa, which is an expanding medium-sized city in Ethiopia, so that it's a sustainably planned city. So thinking about mobility, but also thinking about waste management and potential exposure to urban flooding. And then on this in terms of the sort of how we like to conceptualize or think about what's important about cities in the FCDO, I've highlighted 3 areas. One is about resilient cities and infrastructure, and investing in infrastructure that can adapt to future climate change impacts, and also thinking about particularly urban flooding, which is, we know that the incidence of urban flooding is increasing, and we also know that actually a lot of the biggest damage is done by those sort of low-level floods that are maybe not captured in the news. They're not the big events that you see, they're not the big heat waves, but it's the cumulative impact of the low-level natural hazards is generally greater than the ones you see in the media, right? So putting in place urban plans, Class mentioned at the beginning of the top of the event why urban planning is important. And I would sort of re-emphasize that point, and putting in plans to make sure cities can expand sustainably, but also with understanding that the incidence of urban flooding is going to increase over time in terms of intensity and frequency. That's very important. And then connected cities. So this is partly about the climate change lens, but it's also about the economic development of cities. We have worked through the Cities and Infrastructure for Growth program, or CIG program, and the Global Future Cities program to think about and support provide technical assistance to partner governments to try and join up sustainable transport mobility systems with access to job opportunities in labour markets. So trying to connect communities, not least low-income communities, so that you can expand the range of job opportunities that are available to those people, is particularly important for sustaining growth in developing countries. So that's one area where we like to talk about connected cities, but also cities that are compact and have a level of density that's the right level of density for them. And then finally, well-governed cities. Urban governance is often the thing that's kind of missed out in a lot of these discussions. We like to speak a lot about climate change and water and mobility and transport and waste management, but if you don't have a functioning city government that has the capacity, both in terms of staff, well-trained staff, and the structures and management processes that allows them to, for example, raise and deploy finance for low carbon infrastructure projects, and to understand how to both manage them and conceive of them and then deliver those projects. It's going to be very hard to address climate change. And I would like to point out that in secondary cities, they're the cities that really need the capacity building support, because that's where there often isn't the capacity to plan and manage sort of large scale infrastructure projects, and to think about how to plan a city sustainably. So that's why we've been working with partners like UN Habitat and others to improve the urban governance and sort of the management capacity of cities. Next slide, please. So this is just to get, so on the, I won't dwell on the visual on the right. I just want to make the point that and I think you all know it, that cities in Africa, particularly in Africa, they're seeing growth rates, some of them of 4 to 5% per year, including Nairobi, Kampala, Dar are growing rapidly, and they're also extremely vulnerable to climate change. And what have we done in response to that at the FCDO? Well, we've supported governments by working with multilateral partners and others to provide technical assistance to respond to those events. So for example, in Tanzania, we've worked with the World Bank on urban flooding. The Mbezi River Basin floods frequently most years. And we work with the World Bank to effectively look at the causes and drivers of flooding, and to try and identify the risks, and then to try and generate risk models and engage in participatory planning. So Selene mentioned the importance of sort of bottom-up community engagement, and that was part of the Tanzania Urban Resilience Programme. We've also worked with academic institutions in the UK to generate risk profiles of cities in East and West Africa. So that was part of the Urban Africa Risk Knowledge Programme with academics at King's College. So that's about generating a knowledge base that allows donors and others to use that knowledge to then deliver interventions that deliver a better and more effective response to natural hazards. And again, there was a big focus in that programme on urban flooding. I mentioned the Global Future Cities Programme, obviously, and the Cities and Infrastructure for Growth Programme. Those are two technical assistance programmes that are currently in implementation, and there's more available, and I'm happy to share more details. The Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund is another programme that we've worked with Asian Development Bank and Rockefeller Foundation. Ramon will come on to speak about that, so I won't go into too much detail, but I'm just highlighting these programs because this is not new for the FCDO. We've been implementing programs in DFID and in the Foreign Office before we came together as a single department to address these issues. But obviously the agenda and the importance of sort of going further and faster in response to climate change and keeping within that 1.5 degrees target is obviously more salient to not only the UK government as being we're hosting COP, but others in the department and various departments, including in my team, which sits in the sort of Economic Cooperation and Growth Directorate within the department. We work closely with those in the Climate and Environment department to design these programs and implement them. And then the last one, just to highlight sort of from next year, one of our plans is to try and bring together a range of programs into a new vehicle, which will be a centre of excellence focused on green cities and infrastructure. And to do that, we're going to try and bring together our technical assistance programs under one umbrella, if you like, and bring together UK partners to support that, including, for example, the UK Built Environment Advisory Group that the class mentioned at the top of the event, and also partners like Transport for London that are starting to work in countries like India to support, for example, mobility and transport planning. Next slide, please. And that's actually time for, so time's up. I'd just like to say, that I'm happy to share any more details of those programs. And yeah, this is a very engaging topic. It's great to have you all here. And I think climate change agenda, and the focus of our cities within that agenda will be sort of at the forefront of FCDO's efforts for the next for the foreseeable future. And we've got a role to play in that, and it's great to work with you all and share this knowledge, ideas about these tools. Thanks.
So thank you, Rory. Next, we have two presenters doing parallel work in the Philippines as part of the Resilient Cities initiative that Rory just mentioned. So Ramon and Cherry will be sharing New Clark City's integrated resiliency plan, showcasing nature-based solutions for flood mitigation and sustainable development. Ramon is a consultant with Asian Development Bank and an adjunct professor at the Asian Institute of Management. His expertise is in civil and environmental engineering, urban infrastructure development, climate resilience, and land and water resource management. Cherry is an international development program advisor with over a decade of diverse experience in development economics, international trade and investments, and she is currently working as the program advisor for the Global Future Cities program in the Philippines. So with that, I would like to invite Ramon to start the presentation.
Thank you, Jean. So my presentation is on the application of nature-based solutions for climate resilient infrastructure in New Clark City, related to the areas that Rory mentioned in his presentation. So this is a joint presentation, also showcasing the collaboration between the FCDO to the Future Cities program and ADB's Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund. Next slide, please. So before diving into the case itself, I thought that it would be useful to have some kind of a framework or a context for that case. So I'll start with the trust fund's approach to nature-based solutions, which is very close to what ADB is also adopting. And we'll say something about the opportunities and challenges that we are seeing, manifested also in the case study at New Clark City. But of course, the main presentation is on the New Clark City experience, starting with the master plan and continuing with the UK FCDO's program, which is ongoing in New Clark City. So actually, number 3 and 4 were sequential. And we'd like to think that the ADB review of the master plan to the trust fund set the scene or set the stage for the Future Cities program in New Clark City. Next, please. A bit of a background, the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, as mentioned by Rory, is a 150 million fund administered by ADB. Majority contribution comes from the UK government. And the fund supports climate integration into city planning, infrastructure development, and institutional strengthening, and of course, knowledge building. We are working primarily in 25 cities, but actually many more indirectly across 8 countries. And so far, 21 projects have been completed and 45 more are ongoing. The work of the trust fund in New Clark City was, well, predates the Future Cities program actually, because this was started in 2017, and that was to review the master plan for the new city and pave the way, I'd like to add, for nature-based solutions to be able to influence the overall development agenda and subsequent development activities now being supported by the Future Cities program. Next, please. Just a bit on how ADB looks at nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions is this aggregate word that also refers to terms like green infrastructure, nature-positive solutions, building with nature. And that's really about systematically including ecological processes within infrastructure management systems. So we're not just looking at enhancing natural features as a dedicated green project, but more importantly in combining these nature positive measures with engineered system in a hybrid way, if you like, for more sustainable development projects. As you know, ADB is strongly into supporting developing countries in their infrastructure development. Next, please. So nature-based solutions are seen as complementing hard engineering solutions. They're not to be seen as an exclusive alternative, but as a complementary measure for promoting sustainable urbanization and also, more importantly, on improving risk management in the face of imminent climate change. The application of NBS is wide range, and at ADB, it's applied to water, urban, transportation, agriculture, as you will see in the right-hand side of the slide. In water, traditionally already, for a long time, in integrated water resource management at basin scale or flood risk management. And that is where this combination of green and gray infrastructure has already played out and continues to be improved in urban area through green city design of enhanced resilience and the strengthening of zoning and building codes to further strengthen resilience capacity. Transportation, smart roads with measures to protect the habitat, and this is very strongly seen in protecting coastal roads through restoration and protection of the adjacent mangrove areas. And in agriculture, of course, habitat conservation for protection of the landscape to sustain productivity. Next slide, please. So ADB's approach to NBS is looks to be systematic, and that begins with assessing the project, not just in the sense of looking at the asset and its location, but looking at its setting, the setting being the combination of the built-up area, as well as the ecology, the ecological setting, as well, and the social institution that are involved, and looking at the options through that lens of a system, and developing pilots and taking them through upscaling. So basically, my presentation will follow this 1, 2, 3, 4 that you see at the bottom. I'd like to just explain briefly the resilience framework that guides us at the Trust Fund at ADB, and say something about what we mean by integrating green and gray infrastructure, especially on making that case for why that's a good thing to do. And finally, the New York Clock City case. Next slide, please. So the resilience framework, which sets the context for nature-based solutions, looks at resilience really as a feature, a property, a capacity of a system. So this is, in other words, combining physical infrastructure resilience, meaning resilience to climate change and disaster events, but also ecological resilience, conservation, restoration, especially through nature-based solutions, and very importantly, looking at the stakeholders and the institutional setting, as well as the financial capacity to support resilience in adaptation as well as in disaster recovery. And this is a departure from what would have been a traditional way of looking at resilience of infrastructure as the assets resilience, meaning does it have robust engineering? Maybe the size of the pipes need to be enlarged. Maybe the elevation of the project needs to be raised. Beyond that, we now look to the resilience of the setting itself, the ecosystem setting, as providing an important context for looking at opportunities to combine nature-based solutions with conventional hard infrastructure. But not to forget that social resilience and institutional capacity, as well as financial capacity, are very important parts of this system view of resilience. Next slide, please. So integrating green and gray infrastructure, meaning designing the physical infrastructure together with aspects of its ecosystem setting, the nature-based solutions. So when we say physical components, we actually mean at ADB both engineering and nature-based solutions. The non-physical components would then comprise zoning, regulations, policies, and so on. So the framework does not mean that engineering and nature-based solutions are somehow options that you choose from separately, but more importantly, that you design them together. Next slide, please. Now, the investment case for integrating NBS in infrastructure are quite compelling. Well, some would say, yes, compelling theoretically. And we do need to make the case for that in more concrete ways, but nevertheless, there is a strong case to be made that combining green and gray infrastructure is more cost-effective, enhances economic efficiency than either one of them separately. And as you know, hard infrastructure is expensive to construct and maintain as a standalone solution. And if you can combine that with suitable green measures, an example would be instead of building a very large flood control system with huge floodways and canals and pipes, why not combine that with a solution that takes advantage of the floodplain, of the wetlands, so that these natural aspects of the ecosystem are able to detain water, and after the peak storm passes, that detained water can be slowly drained into the more modestly sized hard infrastructure, the flood control system. This is one example of how you might imagine a combination of green and gray infrastructure to be more efficient economically, cost-wise as well. And NBS actually conceivably can enhance system resilience because it's been there a long time. It's dealt with climate change over millions of years. So nature has an innate ability to adapt to climate change. And we can tap into that, then we have a good a chance to strengthen our man-made, engineered solutions. Nature-based solutions are also more flexible in that relatively reversible compared to a hard engineering solution where imagine having to reverse a huge coastal embankment after finding out that it didn't do its job. And very importantly, nature-based solutions offer a range of benefits, and many of these span environment, social, institutional, not just the benefit to protecting the physical infrastructure. And this set of benefits are collectively called co-benefits. And one of the challenges is, of course, measuring these co-benefits so that we can convince investors that this is something to be taken seriously. And as well, nature-based solutions integrate well with decision-making under climate uncertainty. Again, because nature-based solutions are more adaptive and they are reversible, so they can be scaled up in phases. Finally, because nature-based solutions actually have to involve a bigger footprint of development, a catchment area, an area surrounding an infrastructure project, then and those areas are hosting communities, then this also empowers communities to be able to influence the planning of that project, and as well as its implementation, where they can also derive substantive benefits. The next slide. And finally, for the context, just a bit on the challenges that we've seen, and some of these reflected in New Clark City. Nature-based solutions are difficult to deal with in the sense now that the method of well, estimating the costs and benefits are not yet standardized. So quantifying the economic value of the co-benefits and making them influence decision-making continues to be a challenge. So what happens is that you add the nature-based solution to a project, But if its benefits are not adequately reflected in the assessment, then it simply ends up adding to the cost of the whole project and making it unattractive. So this is probably a methodology involved, but it's important that we beef up our ability to measure and reflect nature-based solution benefits into our project development decision making. Also, a lack of standards in evaluating the performance of NBS. And so even if you go to say databases on projects, it's very hard to get a sense of where in this category are NBS, so that I can pull up some good examples with which to learn from. Third bullet, NBS needs a high level of entry of support, meaning it has to be supported by the government, and because it's not just that we go in to the Public Works Ministry and try to persuade them that this is a good idea. The mandate for looking at nature-based solutions as a viable partner to traditional hard engineering needs to be driven from that level, as well as support by the public and other stakeholders. There is a concern, fourth bullet, as well on nature-based solutions adding to project complexity. True enough, because you are now dealing with a bigger footprint and involving more stakeholders covered by that footprint, and therefore resulting in longer preparation times. For project officers, this is something that they are concerned about. And finally, we need to further strengthen the investment case. And then that is for NBS to be seen as not just producing public goods, because public goods cannot be captured by investors, but that in fact, and this limits private participation. And so we need to strengthen the investment case to show that there are public benefits, but so also are the potential for revenue, profit to be made, and therefore encourage private participation. Next slide. So on to our case. This is New Clark City in the Philippines, and the nature-based solution actually addresses flood mitigation, but it goes as well into preserving biodiversity and introducing green city features that will in future enhance the ability of the city to deal with climate change. Next slide, please. And it's located about 100 kilometers north of Manila, which is a very strategic location because, well, it can be linked to all key economic centers. It's operated by a basis conversion authority. You might be interested why that is so, because it's formerly a military base. But this also is an advantage because it gives this authority more leeway to design the development. It's I intended to be able to host 1.2 million residents and 800 workers. It covers a total area of about 9,500 hectares, only about a third of which is planned to be developed as part of this concept of a green city. Next slide, please. So the vision of the city is to be a model for urban adaptation and resilience, actually, using the river system as the centerpiece for its development. Specifically, bullet 1, to provide more open space for the river to carry flood flows instead of confining the river in structural engineering measures like embankments, and use the open space provided by this approach to preserve the area's rich biodiversity, because it's a greenfield area, and thereby create a distinct identity that could be very important for marketing the city to investors and for its sustainability, as well as its resilience to future climate change. Next slide. Here you see an overview of the site. So the part to the northeast is the development has already started. That oval that you see there is actually a sports arena and the place hosted the last Southeast Asia Games. And beside that is a government center that was developed with support from the Asian Development Bank. It's a public-private partnership, and the bank provided transaction advisory services. But you see the river is meandering across this landscape, and being a relatively flat area is susceptible to flooding, and more so in the coming years because of imminent climate change. Next slide, please. So the original master plan for developing the new city adopted a gridded layout, traditional for, well, I guess, urban planning, where you want to maximize real estate that you can, commercially benefit from. But this traditional gridded layout is associated with the solution of, training the river, if you like to use the word training, by channelizing it, aligning it more or less to conform with the grid orientation, and within that concept, confine the river within embankments. Next slide, please. This channelization and embankment scheme was found in our review of the master plan as risky, and we said so to the development authority, because it creates really a high risk of embankment failure in the future under extreme flood events already predicted in climate studies. And embankments usually also create a false sense of security that magnifies the potential impact when it actually fails. Next slide, please. The original plan, through that river alignment and confining the river in a pair of walls, would accelerate the discharge of flood water downstream, actually, because it's now better channelized and streamlined. But that would increase flood risks to the towns below. Also, this original master plan solution would reduce the natural capacity of the river, the floodplain, to retain flooding and slowly release it downstream, as well as recharge the aquifer, important for the future water supply of this new city. Third bullet, it would remove the opportunity to develop the riverside or the riverbank as a green zone in line with the city's vision of marketing itself as a green city. And finally, it would entail high infrastructure costs of embankments and bridges. And the next slide, I think, will show that. Next slide, please. Well, here the study proposed that the solution would be to preserve the natural river alignment, its meander. It's a nature-based solution to take advantage of the river's natural capacity to detain floods. It would reduce construction cost. It would create space to develop a green zone, and again establish the city's brand as being green, and sustain future groundwater supply. In the map, you see the extent of the flood zone. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so here, if you look at, if we try to project what the cost of the associated infrastructure would be, for example, the bridges, in an NBS solution, it would be less below in the lower right-hand diagram, compared to one where you have embankments surrounding the river, where therefore you need to build higher bridges and longer approach segments to the bridge. Next slide, please. So good to note that the adopted nature-based solution adopted by the development authority was to keep the natural meander of the city. In this photo, you see the river. On the banks are actually crushed rock that's bounded in a metal frame called gabions. So instead of building this massive embankments and straightening the river, the solution was adopted. So in times of high flows, the river is allowed to overflow in areas designated for that, including, as my colleague Cherry will describe to you, this park, which is going to be used as a water retention area. Next slide, please. And with that solution, it was possible to develop the river bank because it has access to the river, and it's now developed into a very popular riverside park. Next slide. This should be my last slide for part 1. And after this review of the enhancement of the new Clark City Master Plan, ADB has continued to work in the area, and this time to preserve the ecology through a biodiversity conservation plan. And through this study, ADB is working with the New Clark City Authority to identify specific areas that are not fragmented, and that will serve for preserving the biodiversity and sustaining the future of the city as a truly green city. I'll stop here and invite my colleague Cherry to continue with part 2 of the case. Thank you all for your attention.
Thanks so much, Ramon. Jean, if you can put up the next slide, please. Right, so to continue the presentation on nature-based solutions in New Clark City, I'll discuss the specific work strands of GFC program, which is delivering an integrated sustainability plan that covers 3 specific interventions. First is a participative design of a central park and a citywide open space strategy. Second is a master pilot housing site, the strategy of a sustainability unit within the city organization. Next slide, please. Now, the first 2 interventions are site-specific designs and policy recommendations. Meanwhile, the third intervention is an institutional capacity building support for the city partner, in this case, the BCDA, which is a national government agency in charge of developing this 9,450 hectare of greenfield land that is envisioned to be the first green city, green and resilient metropolis in the country. So now I'll briefly run through these 2 project sites that you can see labeled on the map where our interventions in GFC comes in. First is on the green open space, which we are temporarily calling as Central Park by virtue of it being located at the very heart of NCC and thus becoming its centerpiece development. Next, please. What's interesting in NCC is that from the very onset, the Philippine government through BCDA have prioritized environmental sustainability and climate resilience by mandating that 2/3 of the city will be retained or reserved for farmlands, parks, and green open space. As such, FCDO is supporting the design of a central park, which will be the largest green open space to be built in the country for more than 50 years. Next, please. So indeed, as a legacy and generational infrastructure project, the park is envisioned to be a benchmark model for how we can use our land and water resources more sustainably to foster biodiversity, how we can allocate green spaces to connect people with the environment and promote greater health and well-being. And most importantly, as Ramon had presented, how we can adopt nature-based solutions to address the threats of climate change. Next, please. Our team from Mott MacDonald, had done the rights of ADB have already parks design heavily features NBS solutions, which among which are a water sensitive urban design and blue-green engineering solutions for water management in the city. So you can see here in the image a man-made lake in the park. which is not merely for aesthetics or recreational functions, is a retention pond, a critical flood mitigation infrastructure in the city, because it will collect rain and stormwater runoff and then release them at a predetermined slower rate via a low flow orifice to prevent flooding and damages to the surrounding environment. Within the park itself, the stormwater runoff from the various plazas and pavilion structures will run through a sustainable drainage network and will be collected in an underground storage tank. So this underground tanks will treat harvester through natural systems to meet potable water quality objectives. And then some of the untreated water be used for irrigation, gardening, and other non-uses. The Philippines, being susceptible to extreme heat, and we thereby apply the principle of shade over structure. It is the park and so the trees and green natural landscapes, ambient temperature, thus gas emissions and urban heat island effect in the city. Throughout the park, we also recommend using only indigenous and native plant species to provide natural habitats for wildlife and endemic birds in the area. Next slide, please. Jean, can you move on to the next slide? Yeah, so next one, please. So this is just another example of how we use natural and green landscapes to help minimize the ambient heat temperature in the area. So next slide, please. Just wanted to show here a personal favorite of mine in an area designated in the park as a bamboo gardens. Bamboo being an endemic tree species of the Philippines, it aids a lot in carbon sequestration. Studies show that a single bamboo tree can produce around 35% of oxygen and can absorb as much as 12 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. So the trees not only enhances aesthetics, but it serves a whole host of ecological benefits such as water quality and soil improvement. Also, you can see in the image, natural vegetations increase the structural integrity of buildings, again, preventing erosion that could lead to flooding and landslide incidents. Next, please. What few gray infrastructure and building structures that we are recommending to be built in the park, which will house, of course, some maintenance office, commercial and retail public facilities, will be designed to green building standards, including use of low maintenance, locally sourced construction materials, as well as use of renewable energy. So there will be provision for solar powered street lighting, pedestrian walkways, and cycling paths to encourage active physical mobility throughout the park. Interconnection to public network are important, so that the park entrances are directly linked to the Clark International Airport and within walking distances to the planned stations of the Bus Rapid Transit system in the city. Next, please. Another spatial feature of this park is the allocation of areas for community urban gardens that could produce livelihood opportunities, as well as civic engagement areas such as this multi-use open air amphitheater, which matches greatly with the Filipino identity and culture of how open spaces are used mainly for sports, entertainment, and recreational purposes. Next slide, please. I'm conscious of time, so I'll breeze through the other intervention of GFC and NCC, which is the 34-hectare pilot housing community, envisioned to be the first low-carbon housing village in the country. Next slide, please. Similar to the park, we adopted 8 sustainable design goals to replicate the model of a 20-minute neighborhood, as we often see in European cities. Next slide, please. I think it's just a bit slow in my screen, but on your screen, yes, that's the 8 design goals that we have similarly used for both the park and the housing. With the housing community, again, we wanted to have this idea of a 20-minute neighborhood where it minimizes, again, the need for extensive fuel car traveling and things like that. So moving on to the next slide, across the different housing typologies in the housing master plan that our team have done, nature-based solutions such as bioswales, rainwater harvesting, natural ventilation and lighting, use of low carbon emitting paints, and again, locally sourced materials are among the nature-based solutions that are being integrated in the master plan. Next slide, please. So these are some of the renders for the pilot housing village, which again, you could see heavily promotes community urban gardening, pedestrianized streets, tree-lined shaded outdoor public facilities. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Sorry, my presentation is really image heavy because I wanted a more visual presentation. Here you can see again, we really are advocating for community urban gardening and farm to table market and the use of public town squares and village parks. And even into the very last slide, Jean, you could see here, again, a personal favorite of mine is a nature-inspired church by the river because it resonates very uniquely to the local religious culture and church-going values and traditions of Filipino families and communities. So that ends the visual tour of New Clark City, which I hope gives a flavor of how we hope to use nature-based solutions in planning our cities so that they really are sustainably and inclusively designed to meet the needs of people and planet. Thank you so much for your attention. Back to you, Sarah and Jean.
Thanks, Sherry and Ramon. I think you've shown a great example of the collaborative work of the UK financing facilities to deliver resilience on the green city. So next, we have Richard, who will present on Bangkok's flood management intervention. Richard is a principal civil engineer at Mott MacDonald and is currently the team leader for the Bangkok Decision Support System. So Richard, you can start.
Thank you for that introduction, Jean. Hello, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. So yes, I'll be discussing the Bangkok Decision Support System for Flood Management Intervention, which is a project which is very heavily focused on responding to the challenges of climate change. Next slide, please. So I'll just give a very quick overview of the background and objectives, a discussion of the scope and the methodology, and I'll touch on some innovations there, and then I'll finish with some challenges and lessons learned. Next slide, please. So just starting with the background, next slide. So Bangkok is subject to intense localized rainfall, which can result in significant local flooding and causing disruption and impacts on local residents and economic losses. The Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, the BMA, are responsible for urban resilience in Bangkok, including flood management. And they're seeking a new decision support system, or DSS, to better predict, prepare and respond to flooding, to reduce impacts, provide a proactive evidence-based approach, and improved ability to identify flood mitigation solutions. It also needs to combine latest digital technologies with hydraulic models to enhance their existing practices, and ultimately is there to inform and justify their decision making. Next slide, please. Just some of the expected benefits and outcomes. So better understanding of the existing drainage network and how it responds in the event of a flood, and more accurate rainfall forecasting and forecasting flooding, better ability to prioritize investment, demonstration of data-based planning, capacity building and capturing lessons learned for future applications, enhanced understanding of the impact of flooding on vulnerable communities in the area, and increased participation of people from all stakeholders, including marginalized groups. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just a quick overview of the actual scope and our approach. So the work we're doing is divided into 4 proofs of concept, or POCs, 4 separate work streams. First one is around developing a hydraulic model, which can be run in real time to visualize flooding, support decision making. POC 2 is around improved, more accurate rainfall forecasting. POC 3 is around reviewing flood response procedures and trying to enhance them. And POC 4 is really bringing everything together and into a digital twin platform, a software we call Moata, and using that to provide rainfall monitoring, forecasting, and real-time flood forecasts, as well as alarms. And this is all to help operational response. So the diagram there just shows the flow of data between each of those work streams. And I've shown additional feeds, which we have incorporated into the DSS, such as data from BMA's existing rain gauge and rainfall radar network. Next slide. So just a little bit more detail on those work streams. So POC 1 is around flood modelling. We have a pilot area in an area called Lad Prow, which is just northeast of the city, and it's predominantly flat, residential, and it's bounded by canals, and it has several internal canals, and the floods are managed by pumping out into adjacent areas in the event of floods. And it also contains several BMA flood watch areas, which is part of the reason it was selected. The modelling approach was primarily 2D. However, some elements of the drainage and canals are in 1D due to a lack of data. And the model was extensively calibrated and validated using existing data, and also comparison with anecdotal information, social media posts, newspaper articles regarding major events in the past. Next slide, please. So POC 2 is around improved rainfall forecasting and monitoring. So the first thing we did was to understand the existing rainfall radar network that BMA has. And we were pleased to find that they've invested heavily in some pretty high quality weather radar hardware. However, and the view on the screen there is a shot from an image from that system. However, we found that the data was really only available in images and wasn't really usable for sort of background analysis or modeling. And it tended to be sort of manual assessment interpretation of the outcome from a rainfall event based on sort of previous experience. And this in turn resulted in a limited ability to predict and prepare for flooding. So what we did, we applied some analytics and scripts, which we developed previously on other projects to the data feeds. And this was able to give more accurate forecasting and unlock the full value of the hardware that they already had. Next slide, please. So as well as that, studies showed that the existing rainfall radars weren't fully calibrated. And there was 2 main radar stations. The diagram on the right-hand side at the top shows the two stations, and our pilot area is the grey square, which is sort of equally distant between the 2. And there's a picture in the bottom right-hand corner of one of the existing radar stations, in which they scan the horizontal scanning over a long distance. So what we did, we installed a temporary vertical profiling radar, which is located on the office of the roof of the BMA office inside the pilot area for good position, for good coverage and a secure location. And the purpose of that VPR was to calibrate the existing radars and basically to compare the data against our well-calibrated VPR, which was calibrated in the office in the factory before it was installed against the existing radars. So the small diagram in the middle there really just shows how the horizontal blue line from the existing radar station and then sort of intercepted by our vertical profiling. So in that area, we're able to pick up the rainfall information from both pieces of equipment and compare. So really this was quite a good innovation, and we're able to pick up errors, things in the existing radar. And we also accessed real-time data from the rain gauge network. So we were able to also compare what the actual rain on the ground as well as what was in the air as part of that calibration. So this additional hardware, along with the analytics that I discussed in the previous slide, we were able to do not only just more accurate post-event reporting, but we're able to use that to do nowcasting, which is a sort of short-term 1 to 2 hour sort of accurate forecast of how a storm is going to develop and where the rainfall is going to fall. And this is useful for BMA to better prepare and react to flooding events. Next slide. POC3s around flood emergency response, as I said earlier. So it's really, and the scope of this, I say, evolved as we progressed. And it was really around looking at how to respond to flooding, not just predicting flooding, and how can that data be used operationally in the field? How can those warnings be used? So we started with a review of the existing response procedures, and then we sort of brainstormed all emergency responses that could be applied. I've listed some there. And we also used our flood model for POC1 to actually evaluate the actual impact of those responses on the actual predicted flooding and minimize the impact on critical infrastructure and communities inside the pilot area. We've also built in some some alarms within the DSS, which can trigger these flood emergency responses, and obviously different flood magnitudes, rainfall events trigger different responses, so different trigger levels. We're also looking to do a post-event review of a major flood event. So we'll be looking at what went well, what could be done better from actual events. And this piece of work will focus on the pilot area, but it's designed to be scalable across the whole city if required. Next slide. POC4 is all about integrating into the all the outputs from the different POCs into a single platform hosted on our secure web-based portal. There's a few pictures from that on the right, few screenshots. I mentioned about the nowcasting earlier. What happens in this platform under this piece of this tool? It's able to take the rainfall nowcast, that short-term look ahead, and then run that through the flood model we developed in POC1, run it through the model in real time. And then that actually gives a forecast of flooding, not just a forecast of rain, a forecast of flooding. And there's a screenshot in the top right-hand corner from that view. So that's really a step beyond what we've really done before and a key innovation for this project. We've also applied machine learning to the outputs. That's quite a complicated subject, but basically what it means is the software, the system is able to look at its predictions and then look at the actual rainfall or flooding event that occurred by accessing rain gauges, flood meters, things like that. And it's able to actually calibrate itself. So if it's, if it was over predicting, it would be able to analyze the actual events, storm events, flood events, and adjust itself to be more accurate. We set up alarms in there for certain flood events. So when there's a prediction of a flood event, it triggers an alarm for the users. And this is all visualized in the platform. And the dashboard's been tailored. We've worked closely with the end user, and we've provided a structured training program on how to use it, which we're just completing now. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to quickly touch on some of the other issues. I've talked about the main pieces of work, some other issues which cut across all the work we're doing. Gender equality and social inclusion, or GESI. So we've tried to promote the involvement of women and marginalized groups in all actually the project activities. And then beyond that, we're looking at the actual impacts of flooding. So traditionally, flood studies look at the impacts of flooding on land and infrastructure. But we're looking at how it's impacting on the community and who those people are. Obviously, disadvantaged groups are greatly affected by flooding. For example, low-value land and informal housing is traditionally built on flood-prone areas, or can be. So there are people like that at greater risk, and also disabled people, old people, less able to evacuate in a flood. So we're doing some analysis, looking at vulnerable communities inside our pilot area, using the model to look at how they're impacted. We're also engaging with the community, and this is just commencing, having roundtable discussions with community groups to really understand their situation and understand how flooding impacts on them and how that can be improved. Another thing we've been doing is capacity building. I've talked about the training on the platform. That's a separate piece of work. We set up a series of webinars. We just had one yesterday around other topics, generally around related to flood resilience. And we agreed those topics with BMA, and we're incorporating GESI elements and discussions into those webinars. I put a poster on the top right there. If anyone's, we've got five left. If anyone's interested, please contact me. They're open to everybody. And the last thing I'll mention is just we're obviously sharing knowledge with other government departments outside of the main BMA department we're working with, and also other regional authorities, and showcasing our work and sharing learning with them. Next slide. I'm mindful of time, so I won't dwell on this slide, but I just wanted to show the SDG profile for the project. I won't talk about how it's developed, I don't have time, but basically it shows that our project is, as you can see, the profile on the graph at the bottom, we're heavily aligned with SDG 11, which is Sustainable Cities, and SDG 13, which is Climate Action, which you would expect from a project of this type. Next slide. So next slide. So just to conclude, some of the challenges, I've touched upon some of these. So a key challenge was obtaining accurate topographic survey for building the flood model. Accurate survey is crucial to an accurate model, especially in a flat city. We actually had to change pilot area at one point because we couldn't get sufficient accurate data for the original area. Linked to this is a lack of existing drainage network data, and this required quite a lot of consult. So the consultation with local stakeholders, operational teams, just to confirm our understanding of the existing network. I talked about the work we're doing, GESI related work. As part of that spatial GIS review, there was a limited amount of information on those demographics in the study area. So we used GIS data to review building types, etc., and then identify important properties for GESI groups, and then focusing on the impacts of them in using the flood model. Another item is climate change projections, quite difficult to obtain for our model. And another item I've put there is more of a personal reflection, just to say that on this project, the beneficiary, the end user, is not the client, is not the donor, which is the FCDO. So traditionally on infrastructure projects, the end user is the funder. So that created sort of quite a different dynamic, a positive one, but just different perhaps to what I've done on other projects. We had budget challenges, obviously impacted by the pandemic, and linked to the pandemic as well. We wanted to bring global best practice to the project. We engaged a subcontractor from New Zealand to assist with the radar element of the work, POC2, but we started the project just when travel bans came in, so nobody was able to travel to Thailand, so we had to do the installation of the radar, things like that, sort of with remote instruction and things like that, which worked well, but it was difficult in the early days. Next slide, this is my last slide. Just some learning points following on from those challenges. So I think I found it's important to review and challenge the scope at all times, or always be aware of that. Always aim to achieve best value for the money that you have, in terms of best value for the beneficiaries. And just because something was written in the terms of reference 2 or 3 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing to do now. So be willing to review that and have those discussions with the beneficiary, with the donor, around how you can best spend that money. And we did change the scope of POC3 exactly for that reason. Data, I talked about obtaining data. We asked for that from day one. And then I'll just finish off a couple more bullet points. Linked to that is getting an understanding of funding mechanisms inside the organization. Building close relationships with the end user is very important. So we developed the DSS tool in close collaboration with the end user to make sure it really properly meets their needs. And finally, my last point, I think it's personally important to have a good balance between traditional state-of-the-art solutions. I've talked about flood modeling, which I see as a traditional solution. Then we applied things like machine learning and which are state-of-the-art solutions. So consider all options when you're trying to address the challenges of climate change, and consider what's best for the project. And I think we had a good balance in that. So next slide, please. So sorry that was a little bit rushed. I was just mindful of the time. So if there's any questions, I can answer them later in the Q&A. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing how data has been used collectively to help city mitigate and make long-term plans. So finally, for our last presentation, we will like to invite Tony, who will touch on community-based resilience with a focus on economic resilience and the importance of informal sector and rural-urban linkages. So Tony is a development practitioner who has worked with government and international agencies for more than 30 years. He's also the course director in international planning and sustainable development at the University of Westminster in London. So, sorry, before I hand it over to Tony, because we are running behind, after Tony presents, we will go straight to the closing remarks with Peter. So if you have any questions, we would encourage you to put them in the chat so that we can answer any questions that you may have. So thank you. We'll hand it over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Okay, first off, Jean, we're due to finish at 10:30. So are we assuming that we are running over? Because there's not really enough time for my presentation, and there certainly won't be time for Q&A. So what would you like to do?
I think we were going to finish off with your presentation and then go to Peter for closing remarks. But if you can cover your presentation in a bit less than 10 minutes.
No, we're talking about 5 minutes if we want any. I'm sorry, but we really have run out of time. So, I mean, I can't see that there's any chance of Q&A. I can very quickly go through it in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but okay, should we do that?
Yes, that works. Yes, we will not be having Q&A. Yes.
So you will stop at 10:30, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So quickly, this is the Future Cities Nigeria arm of Global Future Cities. Let me have the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk very quickly how we got to the project that we're on at the moment. I'm presenting to you the conceptual framework for urban resilience. We're using the projects primarily based in Ogun State, but it's really connected very much with the metropolitan expansion of Lagos, the urban and environmental challenges we're facing, our response, in particular, the interest in community-based resilience, and the challenges and lessons learned. Next slide, please. Just to say that this project is actually not a resilience project. Originally, it's an urban planning and transport project. And in fact, the project that I'm going to show you was not in the original TOR. We were based in Abeokuta, where we're doing a master plan. Unfortunately, because of financial constraints due to certain decisions by the British government, which we won't go into, we weren't able to finish the master plan. There is a transport policy for that city. It's a secondary city by Nigerian standards, although it has probably more than 1 million people. However, we were asked to look at this arm of the development of Greater Lagos reaching into Ogun State along the E1 expressway to Ibadan, which is probably the most important road in Nigeria as it links the ports in Lagos to the rest of Nigeria. We're focused on bus mass transit, so a very strong transport focus to it, transit-oriented development, which I'll emphasize in this presentation as part of a compact city approach to the challenges that the area faces. We're asked to look at. I should add that Ogun State is described as the prime location for industrial investment in West Africa. And that's due to its proximity to Lagos, and the fact that a lot of factories and investors are looking to the cheaper land that's available in Ogun State. That includes our study area, but the whole of the border area with Lagos is a massive attractor for both people and industry. And by our estimates, Ogun State has gone from 50 to 80% urban in the last 20 or 30 years. Let's go on to the next phase, next slide. So I just show this slide to show that we've been working with resilience for many years. This is not Nigeria. It could be Lagos. This is actually Jakarta, where we've been working since the late 90s. So the resilience agenda has been on our radar for quite a long time. I teach it, and we have given a lot of talks on it over the past 10 years or so. Next slide, please. But what I wanted to bring your attention to, because we're not a resilience-focused project, we've already had a presentation about our project's contribution to climate change mitigation. This is primarily about adaptation, but I like to use this concept of adaptive mitigation. As we're mitigating, we have to think about the changing climate. As we adapt, we need to think about what contribution it makes to mitigation. Next, please. Next again, and next. And the next one, please. The focus really, the way that we've organized our contributions is looking at their contribution to shocks on the one hand and stresses on the other. These are not simple standalone concepts, obviously, but they're a useful tool. Next, please. So in terms of Ogun State, DPA is the development pressure area around Lagos. That is what the area that we're focused on. We're looking at, I have to take this off because my eyesight is getting poor, and the lettering is too small. But the shocks that we're talking about, the primarily one is flooding, and this is picking up on our previous presentations. It's really the critical one that we're looking at. The image at the bottom shows a very expensive housing development that is on the border, goes over into Lagos, that is subject to frequent flooding now. Heat waves will become a bigger problem in Nigeria, potential wildfires, but things like economic shocks, industrial accidents. There are frequent accidents with tankers on Nigerian roads, and of course the shock of the pandemic. In terms of stresses, we're looking at the loss of ecological diversity. We've heard about natural approaches, the loss of forest cover, which is both contributing to carbon emissions, but also increased flood risk. Agricultural land is being lost to urban development. There are economic challenges, and we're particularly focused on those. I think we probably need to hear a bit more about those than we've heard today. And in particular, the growing urban sprawl and the inefficient and deficient infrastructure and services, the reliance on petroleum-based public transport services, informal public transport services, housing stress, and the reliance particularly on diesel for people to generate their power. Next slide, please. This is the area we're looking at. You can see the green area in the middle. The road going up the middle is the E1, where the urban development has been taking place on a very rapid basis. You can see it's a very wet area just from this one elevation model image. Next slide, please. But here you can see more particularly the issue we're facing. We were asked to look at this particular part of the what was defined in the regional plan some years ago as the development pressure area. The circular area, we're looking at development pressure area 2, the Moe-Bafo axis, the E1 corridor, and in particular the Ogun River Valley, which is the green area next to it, which is being increasingly affected by rapid unplanned urban development, and a smaller river valley to the east, which is the Awuro River. Next slide, please. We had to extend, next slide, this is the conurbation we're looking at, around 600,000 people probably. We extended it to include the cultivated area, farmland to the north. So these are kind of the 3 parameters of our study, given that we're coming at it from an urban planning perspective rather than the transport, which is running parallel. I think I'm going to have to rush through the rest of the slides. Can we just go through them quickly, and I'll see if I can comment. Let's go. Next slide, please. Just the same, the map in the middle. We rely a lot on GIS and mapping, and very elegant mapping by our cartographer that shows the urban development, the industrial development that's happening along the road. Institutional development, a lot of religious institutions, very low density sprawl, and the agricultural land, which is being pressurized from urban development. Next, please. I think the image in the middle probably says mostly what I have to say today. This is what's happening, and it's happening increasingly frequently. Primarily because of poor drainage and poor infrastructure generally, but also because there are across the world increasing frequency of heavy and long downpours of rain. This is complicated by the fact that this river, Ogun River, which the river basin shown on the bottom left, has a dam in Oyo State, and every few years they open the floodgates, and that causes floods downstream. The map on the right shows the 15-meter flood risk area. Move on to the next slide, please. That's very high. Thanks, Pete. I'll carry on, but I'll rush through as best I can. We're very focused on mapping what's going on in terms of this urban development, still unplanned, a lot of informal housing development. This is our morphological analysis, which shows that 60% of the population is low income, living in informally developed self-built housing. And there's also some very, very poor slum areas in the area as well. So we're looking at how can we intervene in this area to manage the development process better, given that there is a regional plan, but it has not been followed. Next slide, please. What's our response? Next slide, please. The main thrust is the bus mass transit network that we're trying to develop along this route. We're developing an outline business case for it. It's an obvious place to have a fast bus service, possibly segregated, very likely to begin with sharing the lane with other traffic, but will displace the informal bus traffic that's going along there at the moment, or supplement it. We want to work with the informal sector to see how they can be integrated into this network. So it runs from Lagos and from mile 12, which is a part, those that attended previously will know that's a separate water transport project that we're developing in Lagos, up to through the conurbation to the industrial corridor that's happening beyond, and on to another city called Shagamu, which is a little further to the north and east. Next slide, please. from the urban planner's perspective, which is where I'm coming from, an opportunity for transit-oriented development for a compact city. Where can we look for opportunities for transit-oriented development? I hope the planners amongst you will certainly be familiar with this. It's not really a new concept. People have been developing settlements around train systems for more than 100 years, but it's become increasingly popular. What are the opportunities for walkable, compact, mixed-use, higher density development within walking distance of a transit facility? And that's where our prime focus in terms of urban design has been on this project, which has been going on for a bit more than a year now. Next slide, please. These are two sites that we originally identified because of their size and location, strategic location, as potential TOD sites. Obviously, we're trying to encourage compact city development along the transit route in order to sort of counter the sprawl that is the predominant mode of urban development. The one at the top is, sorry, there's one on the left, which is within the existing conurbation. It's a site that belongs to a major religious institution. And we have begun preliminary discussions with them, but these were really capacity studies to see what kind of development could be created on the sites. The one on the right is up near the big motorway interchange near Shagamu. This is a bigger site. The one on the left, the lower one in the existing conurbation, we see as a new town center for Moe. The one on the right as a regional, more regional mixed-use service center and mixed-use development. Next slide, please. So we're looking at sites for industrial development. They're obviously developing along there, but there's lots of gaps, lots of spaces, advising the government on where best to focus their attention with development briefs for industrial sites. The other thing we were asked to look at is farm clusters, and we did an analysis of the data that fortunately we had on farms and identified the clustering of lots of farms as well as concentration of cultivated land to the north of our study area, which is why we extended it to the north beyond the original DPA. Next slide, please. So TOD sites potential on the left. We don't have time to do a new regional plan for this area, but we have mapped out some zoning potential for the area, including this agricultural, strategic agricultural zone to the north, the industrial corridors that are already developing, and something that has been suggested to us recently, which is a major extension, planned extension of the conurbation towards the Shagamu interchange, which we've named the Isoko Triangle Newtown. I'll explain briefly that this is a counter really to other plans that the government has put forward, different arms of the government, we think in more environmentally sensitive areas. This is a higher ground area and an obvious area for planned intervention. Next slide, please. The Isoko Triangle is a higher ground above the big river valley, the two river valleys, next to the interchange there, and is already being developed informally. There is a model for this in Lagos itself. It's called Alara City. International investors have got involved in this. They are carrying out similar scale developments across Africa in African cities. And we were advised by a local expert that this would be a good opportunity. We haven't explored this yet. This is very much an outline idea. Next slide, please. We're talking 20 to 30 hectares, really a new. There was a plan for a gateway city, but it got overtaken by the urban development that's occurred. I called it the new gateway city, but I was advised by my colleague not to use that name anymore. So it's so-called triangle it is. We're also looking at energy planning. So if you recall, I listed all the stresses. These are all things that will have an impact on mitigation, but they also relieve the stresses related to adaptation. Nigeria is totally dependent on fossil fuels, particularly on diesel. It exports its crude oil, it imports the refined product, and the power supply is inadequate, the grid supply. So we were asked to look at off-grid solutions. We've looked at solar, but we think the biggest opportunity is probably in a blended energy integration model, which includes the biogas and relating to what's a very big agricultural state, really. Ogun State is primarily an agricultural as well as an industrial state. These would be integrated with the new developments, both farm and industrial developments that we're proposing. Next, please. This is of particular interest. Sorry, I'm already 10 minutes over. I was involved when I worked with DFID on developing a sustainable livelihoods model in the urban context. In that way that the community resilience model has been developed, it's built very much on this, and it's built on shocks and stresses outside the system, but also on how communities can build on their own capabilities, on their assets and their livelihood strategies in responding to these particular outside pressures. Next slide, please. Building on the adaptive capacity of urban poor households. Yeah, next slide, please. I think the slides run out. I won't go into this model. It's one that we developed in Uganda with my colleague Nandini Dasgupta. But it shows that there is a multiplier effect whereby, despite all this industrial development, the growth of the informal sector will be a multiple of that as people are employed to service the informal workers. Next slide, please. So we've done an analysis of industrial development in the area. The expected industrial growth in Ogun State, much will be in our area. Multiplier effect of possibly 4.5, which will add to the local population and will create a much expanded informal economy. Next slide, please. So we have to recognize that informality is the economic space for the poor and those with low resources and educated. It's part of the adaptation and resilience strategy to build positively on this. Livelihood strategies of the poor adaptable. So we're looking to reduce poverty and improve resilience at the same time. And the way that we're doing that at the moment is engaging with street traders and exploring planning options for accommodating planned market space in the BMT TOD proposals. Next slide, please. We are focusing now on the investment opportunities. That first image was of a bus terminal mall connected to the Moe mixed-use TOD development, which is shown here. So there's the bus mass transit itself, major investment opportunity, the TODs, the potential for industrial development sites, and the new integrated mixed-use proposal for a new town. Next, please. Industrial corridor development, mixed-use corridor, street regeneration along the corridor related to the BMT, strategic integrated rural development programs, off-grid and mini-grid renewable energy opportunities using the blended energy integration model. Next slide, please. What are the challenges and lessons? Well, these are the challenges. This is the so-called triangle, what's happening already, scattered informal and formal real estate development occurring without any planning management of it. On the right, this shows the land that's been acquired by the Bureau of Lands in Ogun State, which envisages a new town development right across the Ogun River Valley. That's not the only arm of Ogun State that's proposing to do that. We don't think that's a good idea, and we're proposing an alternative. Next slide, please. So the lessons are the same, pretty much the same ones wherever we are. We need to work closely with the city officials, but also with the wider stakeholder and communities. Their involvement is essential. There is a regional plan. It needs updating, and it needs to be in line with compact city concepts, which will relieve stresses, help in adaptation, as well as helping with mitigation, obviously. We need a clear framework for implementing that. The project vision needs to be closely aligned with climate change mitigation, clearly. Ours is not a resilience project, but nevertheless, that's what we are looking at. Adaptation, appropriate SDGs, and making it easy to implement. We've come across this issue of data. There is poor data. We actually have got quite reasonably good data in the case of this part of Nigeria, but still we have to do a lot of work with GIS to gather more and to work with local sources of information. Partnership with private capital is critical in enabling governance, as we've heard. More urban planners, please. This is what, cities I've come across everywhere, they have one urban planner, a city of 1 million with one urban plan. This is not going to work. So unless we get control of the development process, we're never going to get anywhere. We'll get somewhere, but not going to get there fast enough. We have to move fast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony, and all of the presenters with the wealth of information that you provided for us. So now I would like to invite Peter from UK FCDO and the Global Future Cities Program Manager to give the final remarks. So the floor is yours, Peter.
Hi, thanks very much, Jean. So yeah, I'm Peter Turner. I'm from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and I head up the Global Future Cities Programme. And I'm very pleased to be invited to give the closing remarks for today's session. I mean, many thanks to all the presenters for their interesting, insightful and inspiring presentations. I mean, really fascinating. And I know we ran over a little bit, but it was absolutely worth it because there was some really, really interesting material. So thank you again to everybody. And also thanks to the participants for the questions raised. Also a big thanks to UN Habitat for organising this event, part of the excellent Urban October series. And of course, I'm delighted that Global Future Cities Programme has been able to contribute so much to this knowledge sharing event. And I guess this reflects that the UK government and the FCDO is absolutely committed to supporting long-term global efforts to get to net zero carbon emissions, and also to supporting climate change adaptation and mitigation. And obviously we've heard some really great examples of that work today. And of course, yesterday, the UK government undertook to return UK aid spending 2.7% of GNI in 2024-25. So at least that's a positive development. But meanwhile, you can be assured, our commitment is absolutely there. And of course, COP26, Rory Classer mentioned already, starts in Glasgow in the UK next week. And of course, it is absolutely a critical milestone in our joint journey. And of course, this knowledge sharing event has been one of the many great events building towards COP26. So thanks again to everybody. And back to you, Jean.
Thanks, Peter. And thank you for all those that have stayed until the end. Before we end the session, we just have 2 quick survey questions to get your feedback on the session. So if you give me 1 second to pull that up. So the first question is, are the tools or strategies presented today relevant or applicable to your current work or your ongoing work? I will just give a few seconds for people to answer, those that have graciously stayed to the end. So I will share the results now. It's great to see that most of you have answered yes, that it has been helpful, and at least somewhat to some of you. The second question and the last question is whether or not, the level of knowledge you gained from the session regarding practices related to climate resilience. I'll just give a few seconds. Thank you for those who are all participating, and I will end the poll now. Great, thank you so much for your feedback. Sarah, if you can share the last slide in the presentation for us. So that brings the event to a close. Thank you again to our presenters, contributors from UK SCDO and UN Habitat, and to the audience for this interesting conversation. If you would like to find out more about the program and any of the projects that were discussed, or have any feedback, more feedback to share, please reach out to us by email or through our website here, globalfuturecities.org. You can also join the community forum to continue the discussion from today. And if any of the questions weren't answered, we will also be posting it here on our website. So with that, I guess meeting session closed, and I hope everyone has a great Friday and weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.